In the grand theater of history, some figures command the spotlight. Their names echo through the ages, their faces etched into our collective memory. Queen Victoria, the formidable matriarch of an empire, is one such figure. Her reign was so long, so influential, that it defined an entire era. But in the shadow of such a colossal presence, other stories unfold, quieter, more fragile, yet no less profound. Today we're not looking at the crown, but at the heart that beat beneath it. We're stepping away from the main stage to find a story hidden in the wings, the story of Queen Victoria's forgotten son. He was a prince born into unimaginable privilege, yet cursed with a fragile body. He was a man of brilliant intellect, trapped within a gilded cage of royal protocol and personal illness. This is the tragic, beautiful, and deeply human story of Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, the son who fought for every single day of his life, only to have it cut brutally short. To understand Leopold, you have to understand the world he was born into. The year was 1853. Britain was at the zenith of its power, an industrial and colonial titan shaping the globe. This was the Victorian era, a time of stark contrasts. Unprecedented progress existed alongside rigid social codes. Immense wealth was built on the backs of grinding poverty. And at the very heart of this empire sat the royal family, who were meant to be the living embodiment of stability, morality, and duty. Queen Victoria and her beloved husband, Prince Albert, were not just monarchs. They were architects of a new kind of royalty. They envisioned their 9 children not merely as decorative princes and princesses, but as a network of influence, marrying into the great houses of Europe, promoting British values, and ensuring peace through familial bonds. Each child had a role to play, a destiny to fulfill. For the boys, this typically meant a rigorous education followed by a career in the military, a life of action, discipline, and physical strength. But on April 7th, 1853, when their 8th child, Leopold George Duncan Albert, was born, it soon became clear that his path would be tragically different. As a baby, he bruised easily. Small cuts would bleed for an alarming length of time. The royal physicians were baffled at first, but the terrifying diagnosis soon became clear. Leopold had hemophilia. Today we understand it as a genetic disorder passed down the X chromosome that prevents blood from clotting properly. For the Victorians, it was a mysterious and terrifying affliction. It meant that any minor injury, a bump, a scraped knee, even a nosebleed, could trigger a catastrophic internal hemorrhage, causing excruciating pain, permanent joint damage, and potentially death. And the source of this royal disease, as it came to be known, was a devastating twist of genetic fate. Queen Victoria herself was the carrier. She passed it on to Leopold, and through 2 of her daughters, Princess Alice and Princess Beatrice, the disease would seep into the royal bloodlines of Spain, and most famously Russia, where it would play a devastating role in the downfall of the Romanov dynasty. But for now, in the 1850s, all Victoria knew was that her youngest, most vulnerable son lived under a constant, invisible threat. The world, for Prince Leopold, was a landscape of hidden dangers. Leopold's early years were dominated by an overwhelming emphasis on caution, described by his later biographers as a cocoon of cotton wool. This protective bubble stemmed from his fragile health condition, particularly hemophilia, which made even minor injuries potentially life-threatening. While his older brothers, Bertie, the future King Edward VII, Alfred, and Arthur, enjoyed the freedoms typical of royal boys, including horseback riding, fencing, and energetic outdoor play, Leopold was strictly confined to safer indoor spaces like the nursery or the drawing room. He could only watch their adventures from afar, through windows, becoming a passive spectator to a vibrant world of physical activity that remained forever out of his reach. This isolation not only deprived him of physical development and social interactions, but also instilled a sense of separation from his siblings and peers, shaping his childhood into one marked by enforced stillness and constant vigilance over his well-being. Unable to engage in physical pursuits, Leopold channeled his energies inward toward intellectual exploration, which became his primary outlet for curiosity and achievement. Historical accounts unanimously portray him as the most intellectually gifted among Queen Victoria's sons, surpassing his brothers in mental acuity and depth. From a young age, he immersed himself in books, demonstrating an extraordinary talent for languages. He mastered several with ease and exhibited an insatiable curiosity that transcended the confines of the palace. His interests spanned a wide array of subjects, including art, music, and science, where he not only absorbed knowledge but also began to form original insights. His father, Prince Albert, who valued intellect and education above all, quickly identified Leopold's exceptional potential and took a personal role in nurturing it. Before his death, Albert guided Leopold's studies, encouraging his passions and providing resources that transformed his son's physical limitations into opportunities for profound mental growth, fostering a lifelong love for scholarly pursuits. At the tender age of 8, Leopold faced a devastating blow with the sudden death of his father, Prince Albert, in 1861 from typhoid fever. This event was catastrophic for the entire royal family, plunging Queen Victoria into a prolonged period of intense mourning that darkened the atmosphere of the court for years. For Leopold, the loss was multifaceted. He not only grieved the absence of his father, but also mourned the disappearance of his greatest intellectual mentor and advocate. Albert had been instrumental in shaping Leopold's education, offering personalized guidance that aligned with his son's strengths. In the aftermath, Leopold found himself increasingly under the sole care of his mother, whose grief amplified her already overprotective tendencies. This shift left him without the balanced influence Albert provided, exacerbating his isolation and redirecting his development toward greater dependence on Victoria's anxious oversight. Following Albert's death, Queen Victoria's affection for Leopold intensified into a form of love that was both deeply devoted and oppressively restrictive. Every aspect of his life was scrutinized through the prism of his hemophilia, with decisions prioritizing safety above all else. Victoria adamantly opposed sending him to a traditional school, fearing the risks of accidents or exposure in an unfamiliar environment. She maintained close surveillance over his daily routines, from meals to rest periods, and her personal writings, letters and journals, reveal a constant undercurrent of anxiety. In these documents, she frequently refers to him with endearing yet poignant terms like "Dear Leopold" or "my hemorrhagic child," underscoring her perpetual worry about his vulnerability. This maternal fear effectively created an invisible cage around him, limiting his autonomy and opportunities for growth. While rooted in genuine concern, it stifled his emerging independence, turning her love into a barrier that he would increasingly resent as he matured. As Leopold transitioned from childhood into young manhood, he began to actively resist the constraints imposed by his mother's protectiveness. No longer content to accept his role as a sheltered invalid, he yearned for a more ordinary life, one that allowed him to engage with the world beyond the palace walls. This period marked a psychological shift where accumulated frustrations from years of confinement fueled a quiet rebellion. He started to challenge Victoria's decisions more openly, advocating for greater freedom in his activities and education. This rattling of the bars was not mere adolescent defiance, but a deliberate push for self-determination, driven by his intellectual ambitions and a desire to prove his capabilities despite his physical frailties. It set the stage for alliances that would help him negotiate more autonomy, highlighting his growing maturity and determination to redefine his identity. Leopold's most crucial ally in his pursuit of normalcy was his tutor, Reverend Robert Collins, who looked beyond the prince's physical vulnerabilities to recognize the brilliant, ambitious intellect beneath. Collins became a staunch advocate, arguing on Leopold's behalf that intellectual stimulation was essential for his well-being, far more than perpetual confinement. He actively lobbied Queen Victoria, emphasizing how Leopold's mind required challenges to thrive, countering her fears with reasoned appeals for his development. It was Collins who vigorously supported Leopold's fervent aspiration to attend university, an idea that initially terrified Victoria, evoking images of rowdy students and unpredictable hazards in an academic setting. Despite her horror, Leopold, bolstered by Collins' persistence, remained resolute in his demand. He rejected the label of a protected invalid, insisting instead on embracing the role of a dedicated scholar. This partnership ultimately persuaded Victoria to relent, opening doors to higher education and marking a pivotal victory in Leopold's quest for intellectual freedom and personal agency. Finally, Victoria relented. In 1872, Prince Leopold went up to Christ Church, Oxford. This was more than just a change of scenery. It was a declaration of independence. At Oxford, for the first time in his life, Leopold was able to build an identity for himself, one that wasn't solely defined by his illness. He thrived in the intellectual environment. He studied science, art, history, and modern languages. He joined debating societies, where his thoughtful and well-reasoned arguments impressed his peers. He even became president of the University Chess Club, a perfect outlet for his strategic mind. One of the most revealing and rarely told stories from this period is his involvement with the Oxford University Dramatic Society. Acting on a stage seems like the last thing a fragile hemophiliac prince would do, but Leopold embraced it. It allowed him to inhabit other lives, to experience a world of action and passion, even if just for a few hours. It was a form of escape, a way to be someone other than the Queen's delicate son. At Oxford, he found friendship, intellectual respect, and a taste of the freedom he so desperately craved. After graduating from Oxford, Leopold faced a new crisis, the question of purpose. What role was there for a prince who could not be a soldier? His elder brother Bertie was the heir. His other brothers had naval and military careers. Leopold felt adrift. The Queen, increasingly reliant on him for companionship and intellectual support, brought him back into the fold as her unofficial private secretary. He helped her with state papers, read to her, and acted as a vital link between the reclusive monarch and the outside world. It was a position of trust, but also a trap. He was once again under his mother's watchful eye, his life circumscribed by her needs and fears. He wrote to a friend in a moment of profound despair, describing his life at court as a form of living death. In another letter, he revealed the deep psychological torment of his condition with a heartbreakingly poignant phrase, "I feel that I am a sort of prisoner." But Leopold refused to surrender to this despair. He carved out a public role for himself as a patron of the arts, education, and science. He became a passionate advocate for social causes, particularly the need for technical education for the working classes. He gave speeches across the country, speeches he wrote himself, that were noted for their intelligence and forward-thinking ideas. In these moments, the public saw not a fragile invalid, but a modern, compassionate prince with a keen social conscience. He was, in many ways, the true intellectual heir of his father, Prince Albert. He wanted to use his position not just for ceremony, but for genuine public good. He wanted to matter. This desire for a meaningful life extended to his personal world. More than anything, Leopold yearned for what his siblings took for granted, a wife and a family of his own. The search for a bride, however, became another battle against his mother's anxieties. Victoria worried that marriage and the duties of a husband would be too much for his delicate health. She rejected several potential candidates, finding fault with each one. Leopold's heart was reportedly set for a time on several women, including Princess Frederica of Hanover and even Alice Liddell. The inspiration for Alice in Wonderland, whom he knew from his time at Oxford, but royal protocol and his mother's objections made these matches impossible. He grew increasingly frustrated, confiding in friends that he feared he was destined to live and die alone. Then a glimmer of hope appeared. His sister Alice, who was always a champion for her younger brother's happiness, suggested a candidate, Princess Helena of Waldeck and Pyrmont, a small German principality. Helena was not from a major royal house, but she was known for being intelligent, warm, and kind-hearted. Victoria was skeptical at first, but when she met Helena, she was won over by her gentle and sensible nature. Leopold and Helena met in the autumn of 1881. They connected instantly. He was charmed by her intellect and compassion. She saw beyond his illness to the brilliant, sensitive man within. They fell deeply in love. Their wedding in April 1882 was a rare moment of unadulterated joy for the entire royal family. Leopold, at 29, had finally found the personal happiness that had so long eluded him. Their marriage was, by all accounts, a profoundly happy one. They settled at Claremont House in Surrey, creating a home filled with books, music, and laughter. For Leopold, it was a sanctuary. Helena understood his limitations but encouraged his passions. She wasn't a warden, but a partner. In February 1883, their joy was compounded by the birth of their first child, a daughter named Alice. Leopold was ecstatic. He was now a husband and a father, the two roles he had coveted most. He had finally built a life for himself, a life of love and purpose. It seemed for a brief, beautiful moment that he had outrun the shadow that had stalked him since birth. But the shadow was always there, waiting. In early 1884, Leopold's doctors advised him to spend the latter part of the winter in the milder climate of the south of France to escape the harsh English weather, which often aggravated his joint pain. His wife, Helena, was pregnant with their second child and could not travel. So reluctantly, he went alone, staying at a villa in Cannes. On March 27th, the historical accounts present a slightly muddled but ultimately tragic picture. While at the Cercle Nautique, a local yacht club, Leopold either slipped on a staircase or tripped and fell, twisting his knee and bumping his head. The injury seemed minor at first. He was helped back to his villa and put to bed. He was given sedatives for the pain, but beneath the surface, the familiar, terrifying process had begun. A slow, unstoppable bleed was starting in his knee, and more critically, in his brain. He seemed to rally later in the evening, but overnight, the cerebral hemorrhage worsened. He fell into a coma. By the morning of March 28, 1884, Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, was dead. He was just 30 years old. The news was a thunderbolt. Queen Victoria was utterly devastated. In her journal, she wrote of a terrible blow which has struck me to the earth. She had lost her dearest Leopold, her beloved son, who was so bright, so clever. For the second time in her life, A core part of her world had been ripped away. The loss was profound, not just because he was her son, but because he was her intellectual companion, a living link to her beloved Albert. The historical significance of Leopold's life and death ripples outwards in several powerful ways. The most immediate was, of course, the genetic legacy. His daughter Alice, born just a year before he died, was, like her grandmother Victoria, a carrier of hemophilia. She passed it on to her own son, Rupert, Viscount Tremetton, who would die from a brain hemorrhage after a car accident in 1928, a tragic echo of his grandfather's fate. But the most shocking and historically complex consequence lies with the son Leopold never met. 4 months after his death, Helena gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Charles Edward. This posthumous son inherited his father's title, becoming the new Duke of Albany. Later, he also inherited the German dukedom of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Charles Edward, raised in Germany, grew up to be a German prince. During World War I, he fought for the German army against his British cousins. As a result, he was stripped of all his British titles. But the story takes an even darker turn. In the 1930s, Charles Edward became an enthusiastic and high-ranking member of the Nazi Party, a loyal follower of Adolf Hitler. The grandson of Queen Victoria, the son of the gentle intellectual Prince Leopold, became a Nazi. It is a staggering and deeply unsettling twist of history, a stark reminder of how the currents of time can carry a family legacy to unimaginable shores. So what is the ultimate takeaway from Prince Leopold's short, poignant life? He is often remembered simply as a footnote, the hemophiliac prince who died young. But to see him only through the lens of his illness is to miss the essence of the man. His life was a quiet but relentless rebellion. It was a rebellion against the limitations of his own body, a rebellion against the suffocating protectiveness of his mother, and a rebellion against the idea that his life should be defined by what he couldn't do. He fought for an education, he fought for a public voice, he fought for love, and he fought for a family. Leopold reminds us that strength is not always physical. There is a profound strength in intellectual curiosity, in compassion, and in the sheer stubborn will to create a life of meaning in the face of overwhelming adversity. He couldn't be a soldier or an adventurer in the traditional sense, but he was an explorer of ideas and a warrior of the spirit. He knew his time was likely to be short, and he filled it with as much purpose and love as he possibly could. His story is a deeply human one. It's about the universal search for identity, the ache for independence, and the joy of finding love. It's a somber reflection on the randomness of genetics and the fragility of life. In the grand, imposing gallery of Victorian royalty, Prince Leopold's portrait may be smaller, quieter, and hung in a less prominent place. But if you stop and look closely, you'll see a story of incredible courage, intellect, and heart. A life that, though tragically brief, was anything but insignificant. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.